Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And this one's really fascinating. We're talking about the connections between ancient Egyptian spirituality and the Bible. Okay, and as we were researching this, I'm really struck by how much older ancient Egyptian civilization is. Oh yeah, than Christianity thousands of years. Yeah, I mean it's just mind blowing to think that these ideas, these stories could have been circulating for centuries, for millennia, really, right? And that's what we're going to be looking at today, right? And are these just similar stories that different cultures came up with, or is there a connection? Right. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating. So let's just dive in. I think we need to kind of set the stage first. Okay. Take us back to ancient Egypt. So imagine ancient Egypt, right? We're talking thousands of years before Christianity even existed, and they had this incredibly complex spiritual system. It permeates every aspect of their lives. Yeah, their art, their architecture, their government, their burial practices, everything. So give us a crash course. Okay, so first of all, they're polytheistic, meaning they believe in multiple gods and goddesses, and each one has their own role, their own personality. Okay. And then the key concept is Maat. M-A-A-T, Maat. It's more than just a word. It's this all-encompassing principle. It represents truth, balance, order, justice, harmony, really the foundation of their entire society. Wow. Okay, so it's like almost like a moral compass for them. They show it's not just worshiping these gods. It's really how they live their life, right? It's a way of life. Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, we can't forget about their fascination with the afterlife. Right, the pyramids, the mummy, exactly. They believed in this elaborate journey that the soul took after death. Okay, and they developed all these rituals and practices to prepare for it. It's like mummification, exactly. Preserving the body, equipping the tomb with all sorts of goods, and even spells and incantations written on papyrus scrolls. Like a guidebook for the afterlife. Exactly. That's amazing. So we have this incredibly rich and developed spiritual system in ancient Egypt, long before the Bible was even written. Okay, so that's the foundation, right? We have ancient Egypt with this incredibly complex belief system, right? So where do we start to see the connections or the potential connections with the Bible? All right, so it's important to remember that proving direct influence is difficult, but there are these striking parallels, okay, that really make you think, like what? Well, let's start with the creation myth. Okay, yeah, the book of Genesis. Exactly, in Genesis, you have this idea of God creating the world out of nothing, out of this formless void, right? Well, guess what? The Egyptians had a very similar concept. Really? Yeah, they believed that the world emerged from this primordial, watery chaos called Nun, N-U-N. And out of that chaos, the god Adam, A-T-U-M, Adam, arose and created the world. Wow, so it's like the same basic story, order out of chaos, exactly. And that's a theme that we see in many different cultures, not just these two. Yeah, like a universal story, right? So is it a coincidence, or is there something more going on? That's the question. Yeah, that's a really good question. And then there's the flood narrative. Oh, right, Noah's Ark, exactly. But the flood story isn't unique to the Bible. You see that in other cultures too. Absolutely, and the Egyptians had their own version of the Great Flood. Interesting. Yeah, they believed that the world was periodically destroyed and renewed by these floods, kind of like a cosmic reset button. Wow. So again, a very similar theme. So we have the creation myth, we have the flood narrative. Any other parallels that jump out at you? Yeah, this one's really interesting, the story of Osiris. Osiris, yeah, he was an Egyptian god who was murdered by his brother Seth, S-E-T. Okay. His body was cut into pieces and scattered all over Egypt. Oh, what? But his wife, Isis, I-S-I-S, Isis, she gathered up all the pieces, put them back together, and brought him back to life. That's intense. Yeah, and this myth was central to Egyptian beliefs about death and resurrection. And it predates the story of Jesus, right, by centuries. So are we seeing a connection here? It's hard to say for sure, but the parallels are pretty striking. Yeah, death, resurrection. It's a powerful theme, and it's a theme that resonated with people across cultures and time periods. So it's not just about direct borrowing of ideas, right? It's about these universal themes that speak to the human experience. Okay, so we've got creation, flood, resurrection, anything else? Well, how about the concept of divine kingship? The pharaoh, exactly. The pharaoh was considered a god king, right? Like a living god, right? And his role was to maintain that balance and order we talked about. Okay, and this idea of a ruler with divine authority, well, it pops up in other cultures too, including the Bible. So are we saying that the Egyptians influenced the concept of divine kingship in the Bible? It's possible. It's hard to say for sure, but it's an intriguing thought. It really is. It's like we're tracing these threads of ideas across time and cultures. And it just goes to show that cultures don't exist in isolation. They influence each other. It's like a giant web of interconnectedness. Exactly. And the more we explore, the more connections we're likely to find. It's exciting. It is. And it really makes you think about the Bible in a new light. Right. It challenges us to look beyond the text itself and consider its historical and cultural context. It's like peeling back the layers of history and discovering these hidden connections. And those connections can really enrich our understanding not just of the Bible, but of ourselves and our place in the world. It's all about perspective, exactly. And speaking of perspective, I think we need to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that's a bit more troubling. The looting of ancient Egypt. Yeah. That's a dark chapter. It is, and it's something we need to talk about. So let's take a look at how this fascination with ancient Egypt, how it sometimes took a turn for the worse. Right, so we're talking about the late 18th century, early 19th century. Okay, Europe is going through this period of intense interest in ancient Egypt. And it coincides with colonialism. Right, European powers are expanding their empires, exerting their influence around the world. Exactly, and Egypt becomes a prime target, not just for its strategic location, but also for its ancient treasures. So it wasn't just about admiring the pyramids anymore. No, it became about possessing these artifacts. And I imagine this wasn't exactly done with the permission of the Egyptian people. Not at all. It was often done through force, through coercion, through unequal treaties. So we're talking about large-scale looting. It was happening on a massive scale. Statues, sarcophagi, jewelry, mummies, even entire sections of temples were removed and shipped to Europe. It's hard to fathom the scale of it. It really is, and it had a devastating impact on Egypt's cultural heritage. And it wasn't just Egypt, right? This was happening all over the world, wherever European powers had colonies. That's right, it was part of a broader pattern of colonialism, a sense of entitlement, a belief that European culture was superior and therefore had the right to claim the treasures of other civilizations. So how does this looting of ancient Egypt connect to our discussion about the Bible? Well, it adds a really complex layer to the story. How so? Imagine European scholars and theologians surrounded by these looted artifacts, trying to make sense of them, trying to fit them into their existing worldview. And that worldview was shaped by Christianity, exactly. So are we saying that the interpretation of ancient Egyptian beliefs was influenced by Christian biases? It's definitely a possibility. So the meaning of these ancient symbols, these myths, they could have been distorted. Absolutely. They were often interpreted through a Christian lens, sometimes stripped of their original context, sometimes even demonized as pagan or primitive. So it's not just about the physical removal of these artifacts, right? It's also about the potential distortion of their meaning, the erasure of their original significance. It's like the double theft, the theft of the objects themselves and the theft of their true meaning. Exactly. And it's a reminder that history is often written by the victors, and that the interpretation of the past is often shaped by power dynamics. It makes you wonder how much of what we think we know about ancient Egypt is actually true, and how much of it has been filtered through these colonial biases. It's a question worth asking, and it's a question that scholars are still grappling with today. So what does all of this mean for us today? Why should we care about this looting that happened centuries ago? Well, for one thing, it's about acknowledging the injustice that was done, the cultural heritage that was lost, and the ongoing impact of colonialism. Right, it's not just ancient history, it's still relevant today. Exactly, and it also highlights the importance of critical thinking, of questioning the narratives that we've been given, and considering multiple perspectives. So, when we look at those potential connections between ancient Egypt and the Bible, we need to be aware of these biases. Absolutely, we need to ask ourselves, whose interpretation are we looking at? Whose voice is being heard? And whose voice has been silenced? It's about recognizing the power dynamics that shape our understanding of history and culture. Exactly, and it's about being mindful of those power dynamics as we continue to explore and learn. So it's not just about ancient Egypt and the Bible, it's about how we approach history itself, right? It's about being critical, being curious, and being open to new perspectives. And it's about recognizing that our understanding of the past is always evolving as we uncover new evidence and challenge old assumptions. Exactly, and that's what makes history so fascinating. It's a constant journey of discovery. It really is, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface yet. Oh, we have. There's so much more to explore. But before we get too carried away, I think we need to take a break. Sounds good. We'll be back in a moment to continue our deep dive into ancient Egypt and the Bible. And it's not just about the physical objects themselves, it's also about the interpretation, right? Okay, we were talking about how European scholars and theologians were trying to make sense of these ancient Egyptian beliefs through their own lens, their own worldview. And that worldview was shaped by Christianity, right? Exactly. So you can imagine how that might have colored their understanding of Egyptian symbols and myths. So are we saying that they might have misinterpreted these ancient beliefs? It's definitely possible, yeah. They often try to fit those beliefs into existing Christian narratives, even if it meant twisting the original meaning. So it's like a double theft, in a way. Yeah, you could say that. First, the physical theft of the artifacts themselves, and then the theft of their true meaning. Wow, that's a really powerful way to put it. And it makes you wonder how much of what we think we know about ancient Egypt is actually accurate, and how much of it has been filtered through these colonial biases. Exactly, and that's something we need to be aware of when we're exploring these connections between ancient Egypt and the Bible. So we can't just take things at face value. No, we need to be critical, we need to question the narratives we've been given, and we need to consider multiple perspectives. So where do we go from here? Well, I think it starts with acknowledging the injustice that was done. The looting, the appropriation, exactly, and recognizing the ongoing impact of colonialism, not just in Egypt, but around the world. Right, it's not just ancient history, it's still relevant today. Absolutely, and it's about understanding that our understanding of history is constantly evolving as we uncover new evidence and challenge old assumptions. Exactly, and that's what makes it so exciting. It's a constant journey of discovery. So what does all of this mean for us today? Why should we care about these connections between ancient Egypt and the Bible? I think it comes down to understanding ourselves and our place in the world. Okay, recognizing that these ancient cultures weren't isolated, that they influenced each other, that ideas traveled and transformed over time. It helps us see the bigger picture. It's like we're all part of this interconnected web of human history. Exactly, and understanding that web, those connections, it can enrich our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And it can also help us be more critical thinkers, more aware of the biases that shape our perspectives. Absolutely, because history isn't just about facts and dates. It's about interpretation. It's about meaning. And whose voices are being heard and whose voices have been silenced. Exactly. So as we continue to explore these fascinating connections between ancient Egypt and the Bible, let's do it with open minds, critical eyes, and a willingness to question everything. That's a great way to put it, and I think it applies to everything, not just history. I agree, it's about being curious, being skeptical, and being willing to learn and grow. And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We have, and it's been a really thought-provoking conversation. It has, but there's still so much more to explore. Oh, absolutely, we've just scratched the surface. So, to our listeners out there, if you're interested in learning more about these connections between ancient Egypt and the Bible, I encourage you to do your own research. Yeah, there are tons of great resources out there. Books, articles, documentaries, you name it. And don't be afraid to question everything. Dig deep and draw your own conclusions. That's the beauty of history. It's an ongoing conversation, and we're all invited to participate. Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. Sounds good. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, and I'll see you next time. You know, it's really incredible to think that we can look back at these ancient civilizations and still find these connections to our own beliefs and stories today. It's like we're all part of this ongoing conversation, this search for meaning that's been going on for millennia. Yeah, it's humbling in a way, right? To realize that we're not so different from those who came before us. And it makes you wonder what future generations will make of our beliefs and stories, right? And what connections will they find? Right? It's like we're all just links in this chain of human history. Each generation adding its own link, its own perspective to the chain. And speaking of perspective, I think this whole deep dive has really highlighted the importance of having multiple perspectives. Absolutely, we can't just look at things from one angle. We need to be open to different interpretations, different ways of seeing the world. Like we were talking about with the looting of ancient Egypt, right? How that really skewed our understanding of Egyptian culture for centuries. And even when we're looking at the Bible, we need to remember that it's been interpreted and reinterpreted countless times throughout history. And each interpretation reflects the biases and the worldview of the interpreter. So there's no one right way to understand these texts. Exactly. It's an ongoing process, an ongoing conversation, and we all have a role to play in that conversation. So, if some of these biblical concepts we've been discussing might have roots in older civilizations like Egypt, does that change how we view them? That's a great question, and I think it's up to each individual to decide. Okay, for some it might challenge their beliefs, for others it might deepen their faith. But I think at the very least it should make us think. Absolutely, it should make us question our assumptions, dig deeper, and be open to new perspectives. Because that's how we grow, that's how we learn. And that's what this deep dive has been all about, encouraging that curiosity, that willingness to explore and challenge ourselves. So to our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. Because the more we learn about the past, the more we understand about ourselves and the world we live in. And who knows, maybe someday someone will be looking back at our time and finding these same kinds of connections, these same echoes of the past in our own beliefs and stories. That's a fascinating thought. And it just goes to show that history is never truly over. It's always unfolding, always being rewritten. And we're all part of that story. We are, so let's make it a good one. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.